go. For you, O Lord. Had to pick a windy day, huh? How are you feeling right now? What are you feeling? How powerful is money? Power, money, or you? Do you have enough power to destroy it if you choose? Tithing and giving, both as a spiritual discipline and as a part of most worship services on Sunday, right? The collection. One offering or even more sometimes. So we start with the observation that in the ancient Near East, there was lots of tithing, and both secular and religious. So that tithing, 10%, could be taxes or war spoils or kinds of things. 10% perhaps simply because we have 10 fingers, right? 10 fingers, and therefore the smallest whole amount is a tenth. If God had created us with 12 fingers, who knows? Maybe you could have less to give on Sunday. Okay, I'm thinking to just stand here and talk. Well, there's the Oakland Hills. That building with the green roof and the flag, that's our county courthouse. That's where Earl Warren got his start as a deputy DA. And the Oakland Hills there. I think there's a better window here. Let me see if I can find it. So 10 fingers, perhaps that's where the tithe originated, not only in Scripture, but all around the ancient Near East and all around the world. So tithes, Melchizedek, Jacob, when he pledges his stuff to God, 10% tithe, perhaps based on our base 10 digits, human reality. A2, all offerings are based on God's stewardship of our stewardship of everything. Everything belongs to God, right? It's not giving, tithing is not, offerings in worship are not like a tax where you give God what belongs to Him and everything else belongs to us. No, it all belongs to Him. And when we give, it's just a way of reminding ourselves of that. I'm seeing a spot on the lens here. Let me get that. Okay. I hope that helped. When you look at the offerings under the Old Covenant, they're quite complex, and I'm going to take you through what's a pretty standard modern Orthodox Jewish interpretation of them, but there are other interpretations as well. In terms of the statutory offerings, you start off with a heave offering. That's the first fruits given to the priests, but no specified amount, no particular amount specified. And then you have the first tithe, the 10% of the remaining crops of that year, and livestock given to the Levites. The Levites in turn tithe 10% of that to the priests. Okay, then in this 7-year Sabbath cycle, you have on years 1, 2, 4, 5 a second tithe, and that is a celebration tithe, which you would take to Jerusalem, or you would sell it for cash and take the cash to Jerusalem so you could go celebrate God's goodness alongside the Levites there. The third tithe was the same amount as the second tithe, but taken in the 3rd and 6th years, and that was a tithe for the poor. The 7th year, of course, was the Sabbath, so no harvesting, therefore no tithing on the harvest. And as well, you'd have additional free will offerings that you can make anytime. You know, if you were particularly happy, or your kid's getting married or something, you might give or you had a child born, you might give a free will offering. And then there are all the offerings for sin and atonement and purifications and so on and so on. Those were all separate. And then on top of that, during the monarchy, we probably had taxes as well. So quite a complex system. And the thing to notice mostly is that there's no way to reduce that to a 10% of gross or net giving for charitable or religious purposes. It's just much more complex than that. When we get to Jesus and the early church, in the New Testament, who tithes? You read from Matthew to Revelation, who tithes? Basically, just the Pharisees. Those are the only guys in the New Testament described as tithing. Jesus talked a lot about money. Money is very powerful stuff. Did you have powerful feelings when you saw me downstairs with the lighter? Money is powerful stuff. Jesus said a lot about money. He talked about how powerful and even dangerous it is, how it rivals God, because you cannot serve God and money, because money promises to do a lot of the things God does. Give you security, give you peace, give you a good life, give you happiness. So Jesus said as you approach something that powerful, you need to be generous. You need to have an attitude of giving and compassion towards others, even radical. He tells stories like the Good Samaritan, and he confronts the rich young ruler, right? Sell everything and follow me. Jesus' teaching on Corban in Mark 7 is probably neglected. That's when he was getting upset at the religious leaders for holding people to vows, even when those vows would make them dishonor their parents. So the deal is, if you had made a vow of some amount, this ventilation is kind of noisy. Huh? Let me go somewhere else quieter. If you made a vow of some amount to the temple, and you told God, okay, I'm gonna give this to you maybe next year when the harvest comes in, whatever. And then before that happens, let's say your mom gets sick and needs the money, for medicines or whatever, to care for her. And you go to the religious leaders and you say, well, I know I vowed this, a solemn, holy vow, but now my mom got sick. I didn't expect that to happen, so can I be released from the vow so I can take care of my mom? And at that time, the rule was, no, you cannot. You still have to make good on your vow, because after all, you also vow to God. You can't break vows to God. Yeah. So Jesus slams that, because he says, look, remember that commandment? How did it go? Honor your temple vow. No, it says honor your father and mother. And you're not letting this guy honor his father and mother, because you're holding him to this pledge, a giving pledge. Well, it seems to me that in that teaching, Jesus is saying, if it really comes down to it, then taking care of your parents is more important than your religious offerings. And do you ever hear that taught? Do you ever hear that taught? Especially in our society, where most of the time, nobody is held to financial responsibility for their parents. Of course, most people will take care of their parents, but they're not held to it legally and financially. Actually, about 30 states have what are called filial laws that mandates, it's my mother-in-law's apartment, that mandate the care of parents, and this usually comes into play only when trying to figure out eligibility for Medicare, Medicaid, things like that. Otherwise, those laws are generally not enforced. So here we are in a culture that does not require people to care for their parents financially. Well, in the church, honor your father and mother, so maybe we should teach more about that responsibility. And if it really came down to church or taking care of parents, it seems that Jesus would say, take care of your parents. And in fact, you can tell people, look, if you're used to giving, substantial, regular offerings, then that cash flow, is there. It would be available. You can tell your parents, look, you're not in need now, but if you were ever in need, this cash would be available to take care of you. So it seems to me that could use more attention than it gets. Paul follows Jesus' teaching about giving, doesn't set an amount, never sets an amount or a percentage. He does say proportional, but doesn't set a percentage. Talks about being eager, deliberate, sacrificial, cheerful, and so forth. In the New Testament, we have this very radical development that God starts telling us a lot more about the afterlife. Whereas in the Old Covenant, they knew about the afterlife, Sheol, this place that you went, and but it was very, very vague, very fuzzy, very fragmentary concept. And so as far as they knew, if God was going to bless you in this life, if God was going to bless you, it had to be in this life, right? If God's going to balance the books, it has to be in this life. And that's why when we read the Old Testament, it seems so often quite materialistic. God, give me stuff, make me rich, and so on and so on. When we come to the big Tithes and Offering passage in Malachi, test me and see if I will not open the storehouses of heaven. You have robbed me. How have we robbed you? That passage. Actually, that's the only place where tithes and offerings, that phrase, appears. And that gets taught well or badly nowadays, sometimes badly in terms of, kind of prosperity, material prosperity theology, that if you just give to God through my ministry, he will test him, see if he will not, pay you back over and above, that kind of thing. Well, that was all part of that period of time when God had not told his people about the afterlife. And so if he was going to bless them, he had to bless them in this life. And that meant physical health and physical prosperity. But with the coming of Jesus, with the New Testament, we've been told quite clearly this life is not all there is. In fact, real life is our lives to come. And this life is a training ground. And in fact, it will necessarily involve sacrifice and hardship and suffering. And God's not going to balance the books this side of eternity. So that includes things about financial blessing and so on. So I think we could probably bear more teaching on that as well. The ultimate and necessary standard then is, it's kind of noisy here too. Just gotta deal with noise. The ultimate and necessary standard then is love, right? Both Amos and Paul in 1 Corinthians 13. If I burn my body and give everything I have to the poor, if I don't have love, wasting my time. I've done nothing. I've done more harm than good. So the ultimate and necessary standard for all giving is love. Flip on the backside. So in terms of the American take on giving, in the colonial period, we had both colonies with established churches, like let's say Virginia, Massachusetts, and then colonies that never had established churches, let's say Rhode Island, Pennsylvania. That was heavily debated into the early national period, right up to 1791, the First Amendment, which is separation of church and state. And so the federal government decides, we are not going to have a national religion, and we're not going to support religion at the federal level with taxes. That gets kicked around until actually 1947. That's when finally there was a ruling Everson versus Board of Education that established that the separation of church and state applied to not only the federal government but the states as well. Nevertheless, there continues to be a debate over, let's say, can you use tax money to support, Chuck Colson's prison ministry, which is faith-based. The Everson decision had to do with whether or not tax money could support a bus system that served both religious and public schools, and so on. The charitable tax deduction started during World War I. That was when increased taxes were needed to fight the war, and there was interest in creating an incentive to nevertheless continue to support charities. And that's when that started, and that, of course, has been firmly in place ever since. Prosperity theology, not to dwell on that here, but you're probably familiar with some flavors of that. It gets back to that tension that in New Testament teaching on prayer. On one hand, you have prayers that seem to say, just if you have enough faith and you ask, this is fed into some possibility thinking that has led to some strands of prosperity theology. Then other prayers like Jesus in Gethsemane, right? Not my will, but thine. Or Paul in his thorn, I asked 3 times, and God said, my grace is sufficient for you. That is a tension in New Testament prayer that I don't think you can ever get to the bottom of. And it affects how people think about money. Voluntary poverty, simplicity, and sharing. You're probably familiar with different approaches to this. As Protestants, we don't have a lot of monastic profession. We don't have people who typically will take a vow of poverty or chastity or obedience, but some people still do nowadays. To actually live with a common purse and not have personal possessions. Everyone looks up to Mother Teresa. Well, you want to live like Mother Teresa? Have nothing except 2 changes of clothing. Or I think she has 3. She had 3 saris. 1 for wearing, 1 for mending, 1 for washing. That's all she owned. That put her closer to Jesus in terms of possessions than I am, that's for sure. So here, this is my mother-in-law's apartment, and see all those books? Those are my books. Those are the overflow books that we don't have room for at my house. Gosh, that's how much stuff I have. Oh, gosh. Prospects and needs. So in 1889, Andrew Carnegie, United States Steel, one of the great, robber barons, so called, in the Industrial Revolution, he promulgated what he called the gospel of wealth. This had nothing to do with Jesus. Carnegie was not a Christian, not religious at all. The gospel of wealth, he said, was that you should use wealth in your lifetime to do good. He was very down on inherited wealth. He thought it was just a bad idea. It was corrupting to individuals and to society. And so in your lifetime, if you make a lot of money in your lifetime, you should give that away. And in fact, he supported heavy estate taxes because of his belief that inherited wealth was so corrosive. And so he himself, as you may know, did give away most of his money in his lifetime, including giving away money to create and build free public libraries throughout the English-speaking world. Right here in Oakland, we have 4 still existing beautiful libraries that were funded by Mr. Carnegie. Likewise, a little more than a century later, we've got the Giving Pledge by Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, and this is a challenge from these 2 richest men in the world, billionaires. It's a challenge to other billionaires to intend to give away most of their wealth before they die. And he's gotten, as of this year, he's gotten like 100 something, 120, something like that, individuals and couples to pledge that. Okay, why do I mention all this? It's because these are some of the leading examples of American giving. These are not, and it's entirely not religious. Carnegie not a believer, Buffett is not a believer, Bill Gates is not a believer, although he did marry a practicing Catholic. Melinda is a practicing Catholic. But these 3 men are not religiously motivated. And where is the religious giving in this nation? In fact, if you look at some of the charts below, the chart on the upper right, you see charitable giving by denomination. You see our friends the Mormons are by far on top. I'm told that's because they actually make you bring your tax return to church, and you are held to a strict tithe, straight up. And then on down, for whatever reason, our Catholic friends are at the bottom there in terms of charitable giving. But if you take the average, it averages 2 or 3%, on the national average. And to my mind, that's why people still get away with teaching the tithe, even though I don't think in the New Testament we are taught the tithe. Think about it. The tithe is incredibly sacrificial for some people and no sacrifice at all for others, and everything in between. So I just don't see that it's a useful standard for us today, although we have the freedom. Sorry, I had to switch memory cards there. In terms of the tithe, what if instead of a national average of 2 or 3%, or you can see here even more clearly, 2%, a little more than 2% maybe for those who do give. What if the national average were 17%, let's say, just for the sake of argument? What if the national average for charitable giving were 17%? You think anybody would be teaching the tithe? Oh, no, you only need to give 10%. I don't think so. So the reason the tithe works still as a challenge to give is that it's a lot more than most people give. So this is broken out by denominations. If you break it out by Evangelical versus Mainline, actually you do find the evangelicals are notably generous in their giving. So that's an interesting phenomenon. You hear some people say the more people make, the less they give. That is true up to a point. If you look at this bar graph, that's true up to about $250,000, $500,000, right? And then it starts going up again. It doesn't exceed the lowest income level until you get to 10 million or so. So this is based on people who itemize their deductions. So some thoughts on tithing and giving. Hope that's useful to you. And in terms of offerings, what you do at church, passing the plate, the brave new world of online and Bitcoin and who knows what. Churches may develop giving kiosks, card swiping things, wireless, whatever you might use. Certainly, money is a vital part of Christian discipleship, and we need to find ways to make that stewardship something that believers can express and experience and enjoy in the context of their Christian walk and in the context of worship. By the way, just so you know, that was not a real 20. It was off my inkjet printer. It would have been a misdemeanor for me to destroy a real 20, although maybe I've done it before. It's probably a misdemeanor just to copy it, though, so I don't know if I'm really ahead or not, but hopefully that was a helpful way of at least gauging your feelings about money.